Okay, so we're here with the data. As I mentioned, your very first thing you'll do is make sure you understand more or less the experiment. Please post questions online that you have about the data collection, the data itself, what went on during the experiment, and I will do my very best to get answers to you. I'm thinking if you post the questions publicly, let me see if I can post these videos and then provide a place for public questions. Then what I can do is then respond to them via a video, whether it be our class meeting, or I could just, make a more direct video that would be easier for you to access, where you just can listen to my answers of, particular questions. And that might be the better way to go, I'm thinking. Okay, so when you do your data analysis, pardon me, sudden sneeze. When you do your data analysis, of course, the very first step of exploring your experimental design model is to visualize the data. I like to think of data visualization as like the bread of the sandwich for data analysis. You do it at the very beginning, but you also do it at the end to make sure that you can clarify model results using data visualizations. And what I want you to focus in on is, of course, you're going to estimate the model and make sure you have a proper form of the statistical model that you believe most accurately describes the estimated distance perceived by the research participant. But I also want you to think about the best way to visualize your model results using data visualizations. Okay, this is something I'm realizing I only very haphazardly covered the last 2 times I taught this course, but I'm realizing it should be a greater part of this course as we think about presenting experimental results. Now, like I said, I don't want to show you any research results at this time, but I do want you to know that every group, when they turned in their final projects where they I had the groups actually think about a particular research question. They got to choose which research question they wanted to focus on for their projects, but every group had data visualizations that went along with that research question, and everybody's was radically different. And in fact, when I showed it to the research collaborators, the psychologist and the environmental scientist on campus, they both said, well, which one's right? Because they really portrayed very different ideas. I'll also say some of them were correct, some of them were not so correct. So I want you to be thinking about creating a set of data visualizations that you think really describe what's going on. And this relates to the experiment that we're going to have, because what we're doing is a data visualization experiment. So I'm going to post online with this video 2 research articles that one is quite old. It was a groundbreaking research article all about data visualization. I think it was done by a psychologist. But there is some knowledge about how humans perceive data visualizations, and that's really important when you're thinking about conducting any kind of data analysis. Is you want to think about what is the best choice of a data visualization that will communicate the right results that you wish to be communicating, the data-derived results. Okay, so these studies have looked at how humans can do the different things like use certain human skills such as proportional thinking. We talk about that a lot in mathematics because humans have a proclivity towards proportional thinking, whether or not it's relevant for the exercise at hand. They also wanted participants to understand the use of volume in statistical graphics and whether or not the graphics that make use of volume portray the correct ideas to research participants. So I'm going to give those 2 research articles to you as a resource so that you can see. And then together we're going to have a series of it's so hard to do this online, but I'm going to just try to cover it more or less in the class meetings, and also using videos to have discussions about how we formulate our class research questions. And then ultimately, each of the groups, which will be about 3 people each, will tackle one of those research questions. That worked in the past. I mean, no research question is particularly more difficult or easy than the other, so it tends to work to just partition out the work like that across the research groups. That way we have a common data set. Everybody uses the same data. We contribute. You will all be doing parts of the data collection, but all of this was the master data set that our class used. And when you collect the data on the data visualizations that I'll talk about in just a moment, again, we're going to have one class data set, just like we had one class data set from 2018, this one, okay? So you're going to use this, just to be clear, you're going to use this data set to, do your modeling, which will be really good practice because it's exactly what we're doing in this course. But also create some graphics. And then I want you to think about the graphics for designing your experiment, okay? And I'll tell you, I have kind of 2 motivations for this that I'll let you know towards the end, but this human perception of graphics is useful for people looking at research publications such as the psychologist and the environmental scientist, but it's also useful for statisticians or data scientists to understand, because we tend to have a really, I'll just say, different perspective than other people. So sometimes I found graphics or data visualizations that I think are intriguing and interesting. I present them to an audience and they just kind of go, whoa, I don't get it. I don't understand it. That just doesn't help me understand the data at all. So I think it's important for you, it's part of your job as a data scientist or statistician, to be sure that you understand how to portray data in ways that are relevant and I'm thinking of the wrong word, usable to non-stat data scientists, non-data oriented people. Okay, so enough of that. Let's get to the resources. Okay, so you have the data, you're working on the modeling. While you're doing this, I want you to start with this resource. It's a very easy, not this resource, my bad. Here we go. Let me make it so that you can really see this better. There we go. Now you can see the whole, I guess it's not. This is an online textbook, The Fundamentals of Data Visualization. It's fairly low level, in my opinion. I think this is really better for like a undergrad level book. And in fact, I plan to use it for a new undergrad course we're developing in the future. But you'll notice that what the book does is it gives you a general idea of different data knowledge types, data ontologies, and then it starts leading you into how you visualize different kinds of data. So if you think about that data that we have from the proximity experiment, animal proximity experiment, we have data that is showing the effects of those 3 different factors, 3 potential factors. I am not telling you if they're fixed or random at this point, but 3 potential factors. Remember, the factors were the distance of the animal, the mode of the animal being displayed, live or picture, and then finally the order of the animals being viewed. So which order, did you see spider, scorpion, cockroach, then ambler pigeon, or some other order. Okay, so we're really interested in looking at, especially maybe for the preliminary visualizations, we're really fundamentally interested in associations. Associations between, say, that distance metric, that perceived distance, and the various factors. So feel free to read through all of this. This is interesting stuff, I think. But if you go to chapter 12, it's going to start talking about visualization. Okay, the title of chapter 12 actually is Visualizing Associations Among Two or More Quantitative Variables. Now, we do have some qualitative variables. We'll talk about that in a moment. But basically, they start out and say, when you have a bunch of quantitative variables, one of your major tasks is to start thinking about how you can visualize that. That gets to be very complicated, particularly when you have very high dimensional data. Sorry, I had a little disruption there. But you'll notice it starts with very basic data visualization, such as scatter plots, which is where you always begin when you have two quantitative variables. But you can vary them by a qualitative factor, such as here it's female versus male on this. You can split them using like a ggplot type facility in R to display them separately by gender or by sex. You can use these correlation matrices. It's like a scatter plot matrix that shows all the associations in one visualization. There's correlograms, which are a way to also use like shading to show correlations, associations. You can also incorporate other information. So for example, on this plot, the shade of the plot is showing you the degree, the amount of correlation. The circle size, though, are scaled by the absolute value of the correlation coefficient as well. So this really makes the larger correlation stand out. But I've also seen a plot like this done and made a plot like this where I use the shading for the level of association, but I allowed the circle size to vary by some other variable, okay? Like maybe some qualitative factor. You can try methods of dimension rejection to visualize different components of variation or association, I should say. You can look at these PC plots that show you the contribution of the principal components to the Euclidean space and how each of those variables provides information. This may be less useful to our data, but you can think about it. Okay, so that there's also going to be some other sections. Let me find them real quick. For example, you might just go to the directory of visualizations to begin with. Here it goes over if you want to portray amounts, here's some basic types. If you want to show distributions in some ways, especially like comparative distributions, here's some basic types. Both of those could certainly come in handy on this. Proportions, here's some ways to show visualize proportions in data. Then I'm going to quit clicking and just scroll. XY relationships, so there we have a scatter plot with the size of the plotting point proportional to some other variable. Very, very useful. There's I like these bins, the 2D and hex bins also. This is very useful. You might look into that. But there's going to be a lot of ways that you can begin to show, visualize the data and communicate the experimental design research results. Be creative. Maybe try some things that maybe you always just use side-by-side box plots. Try something else. Do the side-by-side box plot. I don't mean don't do what you go to by default, but try something more. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I'm nearly out of time, but we'll pick up later on the next steps.